Welcome to this year's Georgia Signing Day special, where we look at every single player on the defensive side of the ball and kind of talk about what kind of players Georgia's getting. There's going to be some opinionated stuff in there from me. If you guys disagree, don't only say, feel free to disagree. I encourage it. Please reach out if you think I'm underrating any player, overrating any player. I would love hearing Georgia fans' opinions on these kind of players. And we're just going to do defense today. Sometime before the national championship, we'll do the offensive side of the ball. I think there's a lot of talent on that side of the ball that Georgia brought in 2026 as well. So I'm really excited to break down the offensive side. Usually with the USC one, I was like, oh, if this gets enough likes, we'll do the offense. I can tell you right now, I'd appreciate it if you like this kind of content, but we'll do the offense regardless of how this video gets received. But yeah, at the end of the day, you guys let me know what you think about these players. I tried to do a voiceover for every single one, but I just kind of ran out of time, and there were some guys that I just played the film for just to kind of keep it complete. But feel free to let me know your opinion on anyone. We'll make sure we do the offense later, and thanks for watching. We're going to get started with the highest rated player that Georgia signs on either side of the ball. That ends up being 5-star defensive lineman Valdin Sone. Really interesting football player. This guy grew up in Sweden playing soccer and taijutsu or jujitsu. And I got to tell you, you turn on the film, it does not look like a guy that didn't grow up playing football his entire life. So when I first turned on the film back in March or April, whenever he first committed to Georgia, you kind of read that this guy didn't have a football background. You read that he was 6'3", 316. You kind of expected the film to be a lot more raw. Maybe you like the athleticism. Maybe you like the physicality that he showed. Maybe he had really long arms or something. And you kind of thought that it was just going to be on Georgia to develop him into a good football player. But then you turn on the actual film, and I think I was blown away by how good of a defensive lineman, how technically refined this guy already is as a high school football player for a guy that did not grow up playing football. So to me, what it all starts with Valdin Sone is the leverage that he plays with at 6'3", 316. Big football player, right? He does such a good job keeping that pad level low and consistently playing with good leverage and then using that lower body strength to get into the backfield and just be a menace against the run. So a lot of times, man, we watch draft players every year, fifth-year seniors even, guys that grew up playing football, that grew up in the United States, and good football programs as well, across the entire country. And even as they're going into the NFL and even in the NFL, they don't do a great job playing with that low pad level. That's always something that's really developmental for defensive linemen, in my opinion, especially the bigger ones, because it's tough to keep a low pad level at 6'3". You're just naturally such a big football player. It's kind of difficult to do. With Valdin Sone, it's just so consistent. Every highlight is just him shooting out with that low pad level, and it is just way too much for these opposing offensive linemen to handle. Sone's a great athlete as well. We're going to see that on some of these screens here, the way that he can read a screen, and then he has the athleticism to redirect and make a play on the perimeter. So I think right away with Sone, you're getting a great run defender, a great space eater, and then a guy with the athleticism to turn himself into a good pass rusher down the line. This was a big signing for Georgia because you take a look at the defensive linemen they brought in 2025, just looking at some of the younger guys that they have on this roster. Elijah Griffin was that premier talent. He's not the same player as Valdin Sone at all. I think with Elijah Griffin, he was kind of the opposite. A guy right away was going to be a great pass rusher, and then he has the traits to kind of turn himself into a good run defender down the line as well. We saw that pass rushing upside come into fruition with Griffin against Texas this season. So excited about him. But you take a look at the more nose tackle type guys that they brought in last season, Nasir Johnson and Ogboko, two guys that I think are a bit more developmental than both Elijah Griffin and Valdin Sone. So I think Sone was a big get because he's going to contribute from day one and then turn himself into an even better player down the line. Moving on to Carter Luckey, the 6'5", 265 defensive lineman from Norcross, Georgia. This is actually Lawson Luckey's brother, the tight end for Georgia right now. I think with Sone, it's a lot easier to just kind of tell what he's going to do at the next level, that nose tackle like we talked about. Carter Luckey is it's a much different conversation. 6'5", 265, he's very obviously not done growing yet. I think this is a guy you kind of see how his body reacts to Georgia's strength and conditioning program, to the nutrition program, and then you can kind of fit him into a specific position down the line. But talking about the traits that he has, I think he's a really good athlete at 6'5". We take a look at this pass rush rep right here. I got to tell you, when I first watched him earlier in this season, we're doing a lot more breakdowns of Georgia commits at the beginning of the season. This guy was just in the backfield all the time. Just a great pass rusher from that edge. We got him listed as a defensive lineman, as a defensive tackle. Usually I'd change it or whatever, but I really do think it's up in the air. It just depends on how this guy's body responds. You look at Sone, we just watched Sone. That's a perfect example. That guy's already developed. He's going to keep getting bigger and keep getting stronger, but, he's already a lot closer than I think most defensive linemen are across the country. Carter Luckey, a guy with the traits, that length, that athleticism at that length, and then you just kind of develop around that. Now talking about Anthony Lonon Jr., he's a 6'1.5", 265-pound defensive lineman from Clark Central, so a local Athens kid that Georgia's keeping local. He's also a Georgia legacy. His dad played in the 90s with Coach Kirby Smart and Mike Bobo as well. Talking about what Anthony Lonon Jr. does well, this dude is a great pass rusher from the defensive tackle position. We're going to see a clip in a little bit where he's just got a great step to the outside. We're going to see him at the edge right here. Watch the way that he can just have that first step and then that flexibility and that bend to kind of duck under. So this dude's real twitched up as a defensive tackle. And of course the conversation at 6'1.5". Look at this right here, how he can just get under and turn the corner. So great athlete, real flexible. The conversation at 6'1.5" is he's going to be a bit undersized, which I think kind of limits his upside as a defensive tackle, as a run defender going forward. But I think that 6'1.5" as a pass rusher, that's almost a good thing because it lets you turn the corner the way. If you're smaller, if there's less of you to block, you're harder to block. And I think Anthony Lonon Jr. does a great job using that to his experience. And I'm not trying to downplay his upside as a run defender as either. We can take a look at this. That first step, that explosiveness that helps him be a great pass rusher, that translates as a run defender as well. The way that he can just kind of flash into the gap, we saw that right there. And then that flexibility to just completely avoid a block and then shoot into a gap, and then he has the athleticism to make a play in the backfield as well. This is one of the most underrated players, I think, that Georgia signed in this 2026 cycle. But, right away you're getting a really good pass rusher. I think situationally, I'm talking year one, I think this is a guy that can rotate in that defensive lineman position on third downs, use him almost exclusively as a pass rusher year one, and then as he keeps getting bigger and keep getting stronger, I'm really excited about this dude's upside. Now talking about the edge rushers in this 2026 class, we're going to get started with Pierre Dean, 6'3.5", 255. He went to West Forsyth in North Carolina, and before when we were talking about Carter Lucky, I kind of said, I don't know exactly what he's going to be best at the next level. I think it depends on how he grows and how his body responds. I think it's a similar situation with Pierre Dean. I just think Dean's a bit more ahead of schedule. But the reason why I say that, we're going to see a lot of offensive tape. I feel really sold on the strength. So I think this is a guy that when he starts developing, we start talking about him sliding across the entire defensive line based on the down and distance. And the reason that I say that is I think at 6'3.5", 255, I really like him consistently setting the edge, especially with this offensive tape that we're going to see. He has a pretty good understanding of leverage. I really like him developing on first downs, a guy that you're going to like as a run defender at the edge position. And then on the pass rushing downs, we're going to see that athleticism. On the pass rushing downs, I really like him as a defensive tackle that's going to get after the quarterback. So the reason why I like that is I think that first step is going to be a lot to handle. Guys that are going to be blocking, guys like Nasir Johnson, Valdin Sone, even the guy that we talked about before. That's going to be a lot for them to handle on the running downs. And then all of a sudden, you're going to substitute that guy on the pass rushing downs. Real twitched up player in Pierre Dean at 6'3.5", 255. So I'm not completely sold on my opinion on him yet. This is a guy that especially I think it really depends on how he develops. And, maybe he turns himself into a guy that every down we're going to talk about being an edge rusher. But I'm curious to hear other people's opinions on it because I'm not completely convinced on one point or the other. But, yeah, it's, long story short, to me anyway, first down edge rusher, pass rushing downs, defensive tackle. So like I said, I think there's some uncertainty about exactly what Pierre Dean's going to do at the next level. To me, there is no uncertainty what Kamari Brooks is going to do at the next level, and that's get after the quarterback at a very high clip. This is one of my favorite players, I think, in this 2026 class. I made an individual video on him about a week ago, and in that video, I said, it was kind of interesting the way that this edge rusher class for Georgia kind of worked itself out, because originally they were connected to LaDainian Guyton, the #1 player in 2027, who ended up reclassing. I think when Kirby Smart watches film, he has a very specific number in his head that he will not pay more than for a football player. You might get it from Vanderbilt, you might go get it from Texas Tech, you might go get it from Texas, but you will not get it from Georgia. And in the end of the day, it kind of lets Georgia bring as many players. I just think it's smart how they don't overpay for football players is what I'm going to say. They don't get caught up in the 24/7 ratings. They don't get caught up in the media hype. They just watch the film, and that's where they get that number from. And Kamari Brooks is a guy that, whatever Georgia's giving him, I think that he's worth even more. I think this is one of the best players, one of the best edge rushers in this 2026 class. So what do I like about Kamari Brooks? The first step is great. The way that he turns the corner, I think, is his best trait. We saw that before, the way that he can kind of set the offensive lineman up to the outside, and then he has that flexibility to just completely turn to the inside. Flexibility is great. The length's pretty good as well. All the pass rushing traits that you look for. So I think this dude's going to be a great pass rusher from day one. Down the line, keep adding strength, keep adding weight to his frame. Going to be a every down player at some point in his career. But yeah, I mean, watching the film, I just think that with like LaDainian Guyton, I'm not talking bad about him. I think he's going to be a great player for Texas Tech. I just think that, like, at least the way the media made it sound, the amount of money that he's getting from Texas Tech, I don't think he's that much better than Kamari Brooks. I think they're in the same stratosphere for sure, and I think Brooks is a hell of a football player. But yeah, you guys let me know what you think about Brooks, because it's kind of an interesting conversation about NIL and the new age and how Georgia kind of responds to it. I think, like, this is what I look at it. Like, people talking about them missing out on that 5-star pass rusher. This is the 5-star pass rusher, make no mistake. Moving into this linebacker class that Georgia just signed, we're going to get started with Nick Abrams II, 6'2", 220 from McDonough School in Maryland. Don't look at 6'2" and tell yourself, oh, that's how tall this guy is. He's a lot longer than he is tall. I mean, you can take a look at the arm length. He looks a lot more like a basketball player. So we're going to talk about that arm length, how that helps him in a little bit. I want to get started with the athleticism because this guy's got real sideline-to-sideline speed. Also love the way that this dude just kind of crashes downhill when he reads run. He, really fast to read run, and when he reads run, he can just put his foot in the ground, get downhill, make that tackle in the backfield. But, you need that. You need that sideline-to-sideline speed that Nick Abrams has in 2026. It's a non-negotiable to play off-ball linebacker. The way that these spread offenses are going to try to spread a defense out, you can't have, gone are the days of having 250-pound linebackers. I really think this is kind of that archetype of linebacker that has become so popular in the past 5 years. You really need guys with that athletic skill set to make plays all over the field. And that's what Nick Abrams II is. Really love the arm length as well. Like I said, that really helps him as a pass dropper because he can be a bit slower to get into his drops. He has that arm length and that length to just kind of disrupt pass rushing lanes a lot sooner than other guys do. I think it's going to be an interesting conversation about this guy as a pass rusher. I really don't think that you do that as Georgia. To me, this is a guy that plays pretty much exclusively off-ball linebacker. And the reason that I say that is you look at the way that they've recruited edge rusher over the past 2 or 3 years. We just talked about Kamari Brooks being the real, true pass rushing edge rusher in this 2026 class, but they've brought in a lot of names. Zayden Walker, one of those guys that will contribute as an edge rusher. I just don't think it's a positional need. I don't think you need Nick Abrams to be a pass rusher for Georgia and this Georgia defense. I think with the guys that are graduating, C.J. Allen, Raylan Wilson, when in a couple years, if they're not in the draft next season, I think this is kind of a guy that should be playing that off-ball linebacker pretty much exclusively. But you guys let me know what you think about him. Elijah Littlejohn's another linebacker that Georgia signed. He's 6'2", 205. He went to West Charlotte in North Carolina. With Nick Abrams, I do think there is a conversation about him contributing as an edge rusher, even though we didn't really see him line up in that. With Elijah Littlejohn, we're going to see a lot of him off the edge. I just don't think he has the length to really do that at the next level. I think this dude's going to be a really good off-ball linebacker. The sideline-to-sideline speed that we talked about with Nick Abrams, we see that with Elijah Littlejohn as well. But I just think that the way that he can kind of mirror opposing offensive ball carriers, the way that he can just kind of stop, start, and that quick trigger downhill, I think he's got kind of a better athletic profile than Nick Abrams, even though Nick Abrams really loved the length that he has. But Elijah Littlejohn, we're not going to see him do it a lot from that off-ball position. It's going to be a lot of edge rushing. I think we get a really good read of that first step. That's going to translate into that quick trigger when he reads run and then just kind of comes downhill. I think this guy's a bit more developmental because he is more undersized compared to Nick Abrams. But, I mean, when you talk about the athletic skill set that Littlejohn has, I do think this guy projects as a pretty good off-ball linebacker at some point in his career. I really think Terrence Pennick's a really interesting football player, 6'3", 200, South Gwinnett from Georgia, obviously. And we're going to watch here just the closing speed that he has, and this dude is a walking headache. Look at this right here. So I love the length that he has. he's also really a fluid athlete. We saw that the way that he could just kind of dodge that block there. But, at 6'3", the fluidity that he has, I think that's really fun. But at the end of the day, I mean, it's all about the closing speed with Terrence Pennick at 6'3". And we saw that first clip, the way that he just absolutely lit that dude up. We're going to see that throughout this entire highlight tape. We'll keep this one pretty short because we're running short on time here. But, yeah, great athlete at 6'3". Obviously, at 6'3", 200, he's very spread out. A lot more spread out than the way Littlejohn was. A lot more spread out than Nick Abrams. So I do think that there's a lot of weight that he's going to have to put on to see the field at the next level. But when you just talk about traits, adding weight to frame, look at this closing speed right here. It's this entire highlight tape. It's just such a physical, it's a lot of fun to watch. The reason I wasn't going to do the voiceover for this at first, but I mean, the way that he can just diagnose, he pulls the trigger, crashes downhill as soon as he sees it. As a pass dropper as well, really like the hips, but I mean, he didn't even have much space on this one here to really load and hit this dude. But watch the way this ball carrier's head just completely, you almost see his chin, the ball carrier's chin on this one. Kind of surprised his helmet stayed on. Look at this right there. God dang. We're going to move on to the D-backs in this 2026 class now. We'll get started with Caden Harris, one of the top-ranked cornerbacks in the country from Haywood in Tennessee. And I think this film's kind of difficult because we're going to see him lined up as a corner, but also a wide receiver and as a punt returner. I think this first clip's really important because I want to talk about how fluid the hips are. To me, this is why these top cornerbacks, you can get away with being stiff and all that, but I think the guys that get really highly rated, it's really about the hip fluidity. It's really hard to play cornerback if you have a lot of natural stiffness. You can get away from it, but I think with the hips that Caden Harris has, we see that on this first clip here. We won't really see that throughout the entire tape just because he's playing a lot of other positions that I don't know if we'll be talking about him punt returning at Georgia, but we do get a good read of the overall athleticism. The long speed, we'll see that at wide receiver in a little bit, but I think on this one, you could just tell the off-man technique. It's one of the hardest things in football to do because, playing man coverage, in your head, you want to be all over the wide receiver, but if you're too all over the wide receiver, you become real susceptible to double moves. And I think on that last clip that we saw an off man on that wheel route or whatever it was, I'll find it right here, the way that he can just kind of close ground on the wide receiver while not over pursuing and then giving up that wheel route. You can take a look. He just pauses just a little bit, and then he's able to get underneath that wheel route or that route that turns into a wheel or fade or whatever that was. So really like the hips with Caden Harris. From what I can tell, the off-man technique's really good. Not a whole lot of ball skills on this highlight tape as a cornerback, but you can see that show up with the ball or as a wide receiver on the offensive side. We really see, right there, you also got to put yourself, if you're playing Haywood, why would you throw to the 5-star or the 4-star that's committed to Tennessee or committed to Georgia from Tennessee? I think that's kind of why you won't see him get all these interceptions at the high school level, but right there, that's the offensive stuff that flashes that's going to translate to the other side of the ball. But yeah, as a punt returner, definitely see the long speed, the athleticism that he has. Really, really fun player, I think. One of the top rated players that Georgia signed in 2026. We're now going to be talking about Justice Fitzpatrick, 6'1", 185 pounds from St. Thomas Aquinas in Florida, a team that plays a national schedule. We'll see him against some of the best teams in the entire country. Brother of Minkah Fitzpatrick, great football player for Alabama, guy that's had a really long NFL career. Justice Fitzpatrick, really good football player in his own right. I almost think it's insane the way that the zone instincts show up on a high school film. Like, a lot of times when you watch these corners, you just kind of have to guess how they'll be at zone, right? Based on the athleticism, the way they crash downhill. But with Justice Fitzpatrick, you'll see him in a lot of cover 3. The way that he can just keep his eyes on the quarterback or into the backfield, and then he'll just add himself into the box if it's a run like we just saw in that last one. The ball skills as well, the way that he can read a quarterback's eyes and then just kind of find the football, especially in cover 3. We see that a lot with Justice Fitzpatrick, but just a really smart football player, very well-rounded football player as well. We see him as a kick returner right here, but what I really like is the open field tackling. Really gets his face into the muck and really makes plays on the perimeter as a tackler as well. Something that you won't always see with every top cornerback in the entire country. I don't even want to just say that Justice Fitzpatrick's a corner. This is just a football player, really smart football player, I think. So really like the zone instincts that we'll see. You take a look right here, the way he's staring at the quarterback, just gets depth on his pass drop, gets underneath that curl or whatever, that hook route, that fade, and then finds the ball. So great ball skills. I think you get a lot more out of his high school tape than you do with most kids across the entire country. Like I said before, a lot of times it's just about projecting based on athleticism and physicality, but with Justice Fitzpatrick, the teams that they're playing, I don't know if that's Chaminade right there, but we've seen him, he played Chaminade, or Aquinas played Chaminade last season, one of the top teams in the country. modern day also. I don't know if we'll see that on this highlight tape, but I mean, right there also, we've been talking about the zone coverage the entire time. How about him in press man? I don't know. I didn't see this, but we'll watch. Yeah, great hips and then the ball skills. Just a great football player. A really big fan of him. I've been a big fan since I watched him this offseason. Has dealt with some injuries throughout his college or his high school career already, so maybe that's one thing that you'll talk about him, kind of being a negative. But at least from what I can see on the film, I do think this is a guy with a lot of long-term upside. He's a good football player right now. Watch this next one. The hips in cover 3 also. I mean, you have that deep third responsibility, but that's a deep drop for this corner or this linebacker to get underneath this route here. Look at how he can just kind of flip his hips and then get his hand on the ball right there. Really nice rep. Jordan Smith is a 6'1.5", 185-pound safety from Houston County in Georgia. We'll watch some of him right now. And we just talked about Fitzpatrick, how good the eyes were in zone, how fluid the hips were. It's kind of the same thing with Jordan Smith, except now we're going to see him a lot closer to the box, a lot more closer to the action. And we'll see him in run support as well. I get really excited about that athleticism translating into him as a run defender. We'll see that in just a little bit. But that first clip and this clip as well, we'll just see how patient the eyes are, the way that he'll read a quarterback, he'll get into his drop, and then he's able to find the wide receiver. I mean, playing zone's so difficult because you got your eyes on the quarterback, but at the same time, if you're not finding that wide receiver, you kind of have to feel that wide receiver. On this one, watch the way he can just stare at the quarterback. That quarterback will take him to where the ball is going to go, and then he finds that wide receiver to get underneath him. And see, it's just so fluid. It all happens real fast, gets underneath that, and able to knock that one incomplete. Really like him as a zone defender. We'll see him in the box be a really physical run defender as well. Here's one, goal line situation. We'll do the play-by-play right here. Look at how fast he comes downhill, as a linebacker. So at 185 pounds, I'm not exactly sure whether we're going to be talking about Jordan Smith as a box safety or a bit more as a free safety, a guy with that kind of range to play all over the field. I think that kind of remains to be seen. I'm curious to hear other people's opinions as well. To me, kind of with the physicality, the way that he can just crash downhill, I kind of like this guy a bit closer to the line of scrimmage, in that box and really contributing as a run defender as well. But certainly has the athleticism to do either or. But, yeah, that's my thoughts on Jordan Smith. So when we watched Jordan Smith, we were kind of undecided what exactly he'll do. No question at all with Zach Fort. This dude's a box safety. 5'10 and a half, 195 pounds. Goes to IMG or went to IMG in Florida. We're going to see him against some of the top talent in the country again. This dude is such a physical football player. The athleticism's part of it, but to me it's a lot more the mentality and also the tackling form as well. We'll see him consistently get his head to the side, the way that he can get low and then just drive into the backfield. A lot of times you'll see D-backs and box safety guys, guys that we think are going to play in the box at the next level. They'll be physical, sure. The mentality will be there, but also the technique won't. And they'll miss a lot of tackles because at the next level because the technique's not sound. You can see with Zach Fort already at the high school level, really sound tackler. It starts with the athleticism, part of it's the mentality, but the technique. Look at this right here, the way he can just get his head to the side, completely wrap into the backfield. And then we'll see that mentality as well kind of translate as a pass dropper. We'll see that on this one right here. This is a good angle to kind of see this kid just get absolutely lit up by Zach Fort. Really like the physicality that Zach Ford has. So, yeah, definitely a box safety. 5'10 and a half, 195 pounds might seem a bit undersized, but when you consider this dude's going to be playing in the box, you kind of have to have a stout build. You got to be a really strong football player to get off of blocks and, to make these tackles in the backfield. I think 5'10 and a half, 195 pounds is the perfect size. I mean, what's Caleb Downs? Isn't Caleb Downs something pretty close to that? One of the best safeties in the entire country. So, really like the frame that he has when we're going to be talking about him in the box, and the athleticism as well. That kind of gets lost. It's one thing to be a good tackler. It's another thing to actually put yourself in a position to make that tackle in the backfield. I think the quick trigger downhill, I know I've been saying a lot of these things this entire video, the explosiveness, the long speed, they become buzzwords after watching everybody that's committed or signed to Georgia. Well, that's because Georgia recruits great athletes that happen to be great football players as well. I think we definitely see that, and Zach Fort's a really good football player. And now talking about Tyriq Green, this guy's 5'11 and a half, 195 pounds, athlete. I don't want to just call him a D-back. I know that the graphic says safety right now, but this guy's going to contribute in many different ways for Georgia going forward. So went to Buford, 6A powerhouse. Don't really got to talk about the kind of players that come out of Buford. I think that's pretty understood by Georgia fans, but talking about Tyriq Green. So I think what he does at the next level, I'm going to tell you right now, I have no idea. This dude's just a good football player. I think a lot more depends on exactly what Georgia needs out of him rather than what Tyriq Tyriq Green can give to Georgia, because he can give a whole lot. We'll see that on the special teams at the high school level. I do think this guy's going to contribute pretty early as a gunner or just whatever you need on special teams, not necessarily just as a kicker punt returner. He does so good at that at the high school level, but I think, like I said, as a gunner as well. But also, talking about him as a defender, I don't think, definitely a defender at the next level. Don't know exactly who the nickelback in this 26 class is going to be. They had a guy committed. I don't know if that's going to happen. I'm not going to really speculate on that whole thing, but I do think that's something that we could be talking about him as, also as a box safety. I know we already said Jordan Smith is could contribute like that, and then definitely that's what we think Zach Fort's going to do. Tyriq Green can contribute there. I think this is a Swiss Army knife. Honestly, I think as he continue, I think right away you're getting a really good special teamer, and then down the line you just turn him into a Swiss Army knife, a chess piece that can contribute however you need him. So I'm really excited to see how he develops. I know he's only listed as a 3-star here, but this definitely better talent than I think 24/7 would lead you to believe. Really, whatever Georgia needs out of him, I think that's what they'll get out of him, because he's given a whole lot. But yeah, you guys let me know what you think about Tyriq Green, because I do think this is one of the more interesting players in this class. And I know we've said, there's a lot of guys that we don't know exactly what they're going to do. I think that's the case with Tyriq Green. With other guys, I think it's because there's limitations at some other positions. With Tyriq Green, to me, it's because he's given so much. And we see him as a receiver here. I don't know if we'll talk about him being a gadget player on offense. I don't know if that's something that Georgia's going to really do, but really exciting football player. So that was every player that Georgia just signed that's going to contribute on the defensive side of the ball. I think you can tell pretty easily there's a high level of talent across every position. But I'm going to get started with the player that I think that's going to contribute the most from day one at the next level. I'm going to go with Valdin Sone, kind of the easy pick, the 5-star. Watching his film this offseason, his junior year film, how big of a football player he is. And then I kept talking about the leverage, but that's such an important thing to see the field at the next level. A lot of defensive linemen, especially guys that we think are going to contribute against the run, a lot of times that's a developmental aspect because they have to learn to use that leverage. I think Sone's very much ahead of the schedule. It's so impressive for a guy that's didn't grow up playing football. And I think the person with the longest term upside, I'm going to go with kind of a wild card pick here. I'm going to go with Justice Fitzpatrick. Another guy I watched this offseason. Really liked him the first time I watched, and I just keep going back to it. And I can't believe how smart of a zone defender he is. And that plus the athleticism. A lot of times these top recruits, we only talk about the athleticism. You watch a lot of the videos I do. Very rarely do we talk about guys with really good zone instincts at the high school level. I think that plus the athletic traits that Fitzpatrick has, I have a very difficult time seeing him not being a good college football player. Now, of course, he has to stay healthy. That's kind of the one knock right now. But besides that, I mean, really well-rounded defensive back. And wrap it up with my diamond in the rough, just picking guys that are rated as 3 stars or under on 24/7 that I think are going to turn themselves into really good college football players. Pretty easy pick for me, the Clark Central defensive lineman, Anthony Lonon Jr. So I think a lot of times when you hear a kid's from Athens and he's also a Georgia legacy, every now you'll turn on the film. It doesn't necessarily mean he's on Georgia because he's a great football player. Sometimes it's because it's a favor to a local school or, him being a Georgia legacy. Absolutely not the case with Anthony Lonon Jr. I don't know if anybody has that in their head, but this dude is good enough to play at Georgia. Like I said, the pass rushing just that first step, just very twitched up defensive tackle guy, defensive tackle prospect. Is he going to contribute much against the run? I do. I really do. That's why I have him as my diamond in the rough guy. That's going to be a really good football player, despite him not being as well respected by the 24/7 pages. Yeah, I'm going to go with London. I do think Tyriq Green's another guy, not a 3-star by any means. Played at Buford, 6'8" football, great football player. So I got two of them. I'll go with both Tyriq Green and Anthony Lonon Jr.